I'm going to chair referee. I referee my son's Sunday football game, so I'm used to everything that Jewish parents can throw at me. So some ground rules. Please respect each other. Please respect the panel. You are not all going to disagree. You are not all going to agree with each other. So let's enter this debate with that from the outset. It's not going to be a surprise if people disagree. Please do not heckle. Please let questioners speak. Please let the panelists answer. We are here to listen. This is a liberal democracy. It's about the force of argument. It's not about how loud your voice is or how offensive you can be. The question for the debate was a two-state solution, is it dead or alive? We've heard a lot of very interesting angles from a very interesting panel. We've had different extremes. Two-state now, asking the wrong question. It's about changing the narrative of hate and violence and war, about, have the Jews been written out from, the history of the Middle East, or is Jordan Palestine? I think it's definitely true that we could all come up with some statements about, what we think and why bad things have happened. I think what's important from here on in is that we actually address the question. What actually is the solution if it isn't the two-state solution? Is it that we just keep going? Is it something more radical? Is it one state? Is it a confederation? Is it Jordan? What is it? So I would encourage questioners to ask questions of the panel, but also let's think about some solutions rather than just sort of, war, do nothing, etc. So I've got a strong hand at the front. I will theme the questions as well once we get going.
What's wrong with the idea of Gaza going back to being run by Egypt?
Okay. I'm not sure if that gives us a full solution, but it's an interesting one. So we've got Gaza run by Egypt. Can we have a few more around that kind of what about someone else running something? Yeah.
Hi, my question to David Hirsch, really. David mentioned that occupation is one of the core issues, occupation of the West Bank. I'd like him to try and explain to me. He seemed to have made almost airbrushed out the period from 47 to 67. There was no occupation, so-called occupation, in 1947 to 1967. There were no settlements. What makes David think that relinquishing that in the absence of a reciprocal agreement with the Palestinians, what makes him think that going back to square one is going to actually result in an overall peace accord?
Well, I don't think we need to let the best be the enemy of the good. No one would call Northern Ireland a paradise now, with the so-called peace walls up in Belfast. But I'm sure all of us can remember when IRA bombs were going off every day on the mainland and in Northern Ireland itself. And I think that rather than say the peace process is alive or it's dead, we could say it's extremely unwell on one side of the paper, and on the other side of the paper, we could say it's messy. But if we could get as much absence of violence as has been achieved in Northern Ireland, I think it would be very good, particularly for some of our children and grandchildren who are in the land.
Between 48 and 67, there were no settlements, but there was still a conflict. So if we leave the West Bank and the Gaza, why do we think that the conflict's going to go away? David?
I was interested in your question because what you asked me wasn't really what I said about airbrushing the history before 67. I didn't do that. I talked about what had happened and also about the idea of relinquishing the West Bank in the absence of an agreement. I was very clear that to relinquish or to relinquish land without an agreement was actually one of the key problems in Gaza. So the first thing I'd say is that I would encourage people to go and read carefully what I said tonight, because it was actually, I came to this discussion with problems. I didn't come to this discussion with a line. I came to this discussion with a real worry. And the key thing that I want to say isn't, James, by the way, peace tomorrow, because I said also in my text, specifically, I don't think we can have peace tomorrow. But what I'm talking about is the politics of Israel, really. is what Israel believes and what it wants to be. And for me, we're involved in a huge global coalition around democracy, for democracy, in protection of the democratic state against totalitarianism, which is on the rise. And there's a huge consensus around democratic norms. It's being pushed into the middle, which is in a really worrying way. The left, the Labour Party, has lost that consensus at its leadership now, and it used to only have lost that consensus in the kind of weird, cranky corners of the left. Donald Trump is the Republican candidate. The answer is to embrace democracy and democratic values and democratic politics. So the spirit of how I come to arguing for a two-state solution isn't about the mechanics of this piece of land or that piece of land or Gaza or whatever. The spirit is that we come to it in a democratic way, and we aim to treat our neighbours with peace and with equality. One more thing I'd like to say, which was mentioned quite a lot. It's true that the Palestinians have been treated appallingly by the Arab states, by the Iranian state, by the great powers in the Middle East, by pretty well everybody in the Middle East. The Palestinians have been treated appallingly in a kind of analogous way in which the Jews had been treated appallingly all over the Middle East and in Europe and in Russia. And I agree with people who say that the Palestinians are used and abused by the Arab states. And actually, the Palestinians and the Israelis are kind of close together and have a lot in common. And we stand with each other, or we could stand with each other, or we should stand with each other against these totalizing narratives which say the Arabs are this, or the Jews are that, or imperialism is the other. I'm interested in how Jews and Arabs in this small part of the world can live together, and in the context in which the great powers are not facilitating that.
Okay, thank you, David. So the question about, does anyone else want to jump in? Or, yeah.
Just say something. Look, I'm going to just address that last point. Okay, occupation, occupation. The treatment of the Palestinians by Israel has been astonishing. Their economic development, their health, the statistics on the improvement in their longevity, their education, every other statistic of life since 1967 has gone way off the charts better than their treatment by every Arab country, including the ones which have been earning, including the Arab countries who have the greatest unearned wealth in history, which is the transfer of oil money to them. And so our treatment, under their belligerence, while they've been killing us on a daily basis, they have never once had one day where they didn't try and kill us. I'll stop.
Okay.
I could go.
Just want to move things along fast. Just on the question about what about if Gaza was run by Egypt? And I think there's a connected question there. What about if the West Bank was just run by Jordan? But Muda, what do you think about? Give us a sense of Gaza run by Egypt tomorrow. What would that look and feel like? What's your view?
Unfortunately, a lot of what people have been negotiating or trying to coin after the current situation is very detached from the truth. The fact is that we are in a time of age where not the negotiating tables that dictate what happens on the ground, but rather reality on the ground forces itself on everyone. Hamas is deteriorating badly in Gaza. They're losing control, but they're still in control. Eventually, Hamas is becoming a failure state. Until before the last war in Gaza, Hamas was a third world state, but still a state. Now they are becoming a failed state. Eventually, the Egyptians will step in, but again, in the form of humanitarian assistance, not to forget that at least the majority, or at least over 50% of Gazans are actually Egyptians. And many of them have families just across the borders and Egyptian passports. While in the case of Jordan, which is our top concern, let me be clear, and you need to remember that shadow governments who were in exile, mostly in London, have returned over the last 5 years as governments in Tunisia, government in Yemen, and governments in Egypt, at least for some time. So what I say here today is something you can hold me responsible for a year or two from now. We are saying we have no ambitions into any statehood within the West Bank. We think that the pre-1987 Intifada situation was the most healthy, most prosperous for our people and our brothers and sisters on the Israeli side. We think Oslo was unrealistic. We think the fact that it was handed down to the corrupt terroristic institution called the PLO was a huge mistake, but it was not our call. It was your call and the Americans' call. But on the other hand, we think the only solution we can offer is full responsibility for our citizens, for 1.8 million Jordanian citizens in the West Bank, where we actually take full responsibility for them. We're not asking you to remove them, but a French citizen in London who is entitled to all the benefits of France is not to be removed from London by force, unless they commit something wrong, of course. And nonetheless, he or she remains French. They will seek their death certificates and their marriage certificates from Amman, not from Jerusalem. So while we're not, just 20 more seconds, while we're not necessarily calling for Jordan as Palestine, we will never change our flag, we'll never change our name. We're saying we as a modern society and country, we must take responsibility for our people. To conclude, I cannot and do not wish to see the Palestinian Authority becoming a state.
Okay. So we had a question over there about whether the absence of violence was, is that something we can just, we don't necessarily have to have a perfect peace, but can we just freeze things and just decide, try and, have a least worst solution? I'm not sure practically how we can get to that, but Melanie wanted a comment on that.
It's seductive to think that Northern Ireland is a kind of template, the Northern Ireland peace process. And there's much one can say about the flawed nature of the peace in Northern Ireland, but I take the point that, compared with what came before, it's infinitely better. But there are 2 points of significant difference, which means that the Northern Ireland template, the Northern Ireland peace process, cannot be applied to the Middle East. And it's a tremendous fallacy to think it can be. And Tony Blair, among others, has been prominent in pursuing that fallacy. The 2 differences are this, that a united Ireland is eminently a negotiable agenda. We may not agree with it, we may think it's wrong, but nevertheless it's not an unconscionable aim to have a united Ireland. The destruction of Israel is an unconscionable aim, and you cannot negotiate with people with a non-negotiable agenda. It's non-negotiable if the aim is unconscionable. Northern Ireland is not. The second point, which is not understood about Northern Ireland, but which I am absolutely certain of, having talked about this over many years with military types, is that what people don't understand is that the peace process was the result of a military defeat by the IRA. The IRA was beaten by the British Army, at the very least, into a kind of permanent stalemate, and it was infiltrated from top to bottom by British intelligence. And there came a point where the IRA leadership realized they could never win through military means, i.e. terrorism. And the only way that they had of winning their ultimate objective, which was a united Ireland, was to enter the democratic process. And that is why Gerry Adams went to whoever it was at the time, was it Willie Whitelaw or John Major? I think it was Willie Whitelaw, back in the dawn of prehistory, which I remember because I'm so old, and said, the war is over. He didn't say the war is over because he wanted suddenly to be a Democrat, because he was persuaded that the peace process was so much nicer than killing people. He said the war is over because he'd lost, and he wanted to salvage through political means what he could no longer achieve through military means. When you look at the situation in the Middle East, the war is clearly not over. They are still chucking the rockets. They are still stabbing and bombing. The war is very much on.
So
and in that situation...
So if Hamas turned around and said, we don't want the destruction of Israel, we're going to amend our charter, you think we could do business?
What's not to like?
Yeah.
What's not to like?
Yeah.
But if Hamas say to us, the war with you is over, and they say in Arabic to their people, it is a hudna, which means it is a conditional peace so that we can hoodwink people like James into thinking that we have transformed into nice people. I speak hypothetically, of course. I speak hypothetically. James was a kind of generic name. They all called James in Gaza. You get the point.
Okay. Some other questions. Let's get some more from this side. We haven't had any. Yep, lady at the front.
Okay, well, first, can we call it by its correct terminology? It would be not a two-state solution, it would be a unilateral withdrawal by Israel. But one thing I never hear, actually, is looking at the signs are not good, because every time Israel has relinquished territory, the result has always been the same. And I would like to know what would happen, what's the plan B when the territory is given up, right? And very quickly Hamas or whatever takes control, and you have the rockets, etc., raining down. And I just would like to draw attention, you get our best ammunition from the left. Shimon Peres in 1978 wrote a book, Tomorrow is Now, in which he enumerated the horrendous results of what would happen if Judea Samaria were given up. That was at a time when the Islamism wasn't in its full flow, at a relatively safe time. Israel wouldn't stand a chance. It would not be able to defend itself. It would go down within weeks. And it's as simple as that. So I'd like to know from the two staters what the plan B is, should it not work out.
Let's have some more questions around that in terms of unilateral withdrawal. What do you do about the rockets? Is there anyone else? Anyone from the back?
My questions are on a moral principle. That it seems that amongst people who advocate the two-state solution, it seems to be that accepted that will involve the ethnic cleansing of 400,000 Jews from Judea and Samaria. And I just wondered by what moral principle is considered acceptable to ethnically cleanse Jews, but not in order to find a solution, but that principle is beyond the pale if it was suggested to be applied to Arabs in the same geographical area.
Okay. Any other questions around we're doing kind of settlement, security? The lady there's got her hand raised very, very high over there at the back, beige.
No, you speak through my phone. I mean, there's been some really interesting points today, and thank you for hosting the debate, but how can there ever be a peace, and how can this ever be a discussion when there's no Palestinian representative here?
Mudar is Palestinian.
But you're not representing what a lot of the ordinary Palestinians want, which is still peace. It's the arguments have been very reductionist in saying that Palestinians don't want Israel to exist. We've just come back from Palestine. They've been friends with Jewish people for years. Yeah. They want peace, but they want to have the same rights. They want to get their dead bodies back in a timely fashion. They want their children to not be tear-gassed.
Yeah. Okay, so
you can't have peace without a recognition that there's been wrong on both sides.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Let's deal with. Okay, so the lady there had her hand up, and then we'll break and take some of those questions. Yeah.
Lovely. The only person who actually is proposing a two-state process, I'll call it a process because I think it's naive to use this word solution. I don't know where in history there's ever been such a thing as a solution. There's always progress towards things, and things happen with wars and with negotiations and so on. But if we're talking about two-state process, the only person proposing it is Mudar, and it's a slightly different two-state process than everybody else is talking about. But for Mudar to be successful, and none of us know whether he can be or will be, he needs to get the Jewish community behind him. So my question to the panellists is, would you support what Mudar is saying, which is, will you support Jordan moving on from the king to a democratically elected group, which we hope will be peaceful and will be led by Mudar, and will form a friendship with Israel and will give citizenship to the Palestinians on the West Bank while forming good relationships with Israel and working towards peace and a change of attitudes?
let's deal with those questions in turn. So we had the question about unilateral withdrawal, but you've got sort of rockets raining down. I mean, I should just say a point on the terminology. The withdrawal from Gaza in 2005 was a unilateral withdrawal, but then you've got negotiated withdrawal where you actually negotiate withdrawal like we did in 95 when we left areas A and B. So you're negotiating all the way through the security guarantees. They are different things. We're not necessarily talking about unilateral. No, it's not just words. It's how these peace agreements are done. Unilateral is when you just walk out. Negotiated is when you actually try and have a deal. So, okay, does anyone want to deal with the security issue about how can we stop rockets raining down? David, you want to have a go?
Sure.
Yeah.
I think yours was a formidable question. I think you raised, the problem. The problem is, firstly, that there isn't a democratic Palestinian movement with sufficient vision or sufficient power or sufficient attention to negotiate a peace agreement. And I think also, even if there was, then, we saw what happened in Iraq when there was a Western-backed, a Western-armed Iraqi government which fell apart in 5 minutes when a bunch of ISIS totalitarians came in a few pickup trucks, right? So I agree with you. You formulate the problem formidably. What's the answer? The answer is that we are in favour of living in a democratic peace with our neighbours. The answer is that we believe that fundamentally people are, of value as human beings. So as a political program, Israel needs to say, and people don't know, actually. People don't know that Israel wants peace. People don't know that Israel wants to live in peace with its neighbours. People don't know that Israel doesn't want to steal their land. Israel needs to be much more proactive and do what it can to build a democratic politics. And of course, a democratic politics in Israel would facilitate the rise of democratic politics in other places, and an undemocratic politics in Israel, a politics of demonization.
No, that's all right. You can. Okay, David. Let's.
Yeah, I just want to say one thing. Actually, the atmosphere in this room is appalling. Right? People need to respect the chair, and people need to sit and debate because it's really indicative of something.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, David. Thank you. It's a very tricky issue, and it's on the one hand, if you're facing off against opponents who then become democracies, maybe they wouldn't send rockets over. Melanie wanted to just come back on this point.
I think it's a mistake to think that this is in Israel's gift to stop the rockets. It can only manage to do that up to a point. Because what I think is always overlooked in these circumstances is that the people chucking the rockets and making the knife attacks and blowing up themselves and so on, they are not acting in a vacuum. There are people who are funding them. And you have to cut off the funding stream. And much of the funding stream for the incitement comes from us, i.e. the taxpayers of Britain and the EU. Now, the governments of the so-called civilized world need to have their feet held to the fire. They are complicit in these acts of terror, and they have to be made to answer for that. For reasons best known to itself, Israel doesn't do that. It's too frightened to take on its ostensible allies. So the result is that no one is holding their feet to the fire. Similarly, the Arab world, the Palestinians have been used, as has been said several times, including by me on this platform tonight, as pawns. Everyone looks to them, and everyone blames them, and they are certainly not blameless, but nevertheless they are being used. The people who are behind the violence are the Arab states. The Arab states get a free pass from the Western world, which considers it in various different ways in their interests to appease, to humor, to go along with, to ignore, to sanitize what the Arab states are doing. The Arab states have to have their feet held to the fire by the West. In other words, the world has to wake up to the fact the world is responsible the free world is responsible when these acts of violence are taking place in the Middle East. The reason why Israel cannot stop them is because behind these pathetic Palestinians are very powerful state actors who are being indulged by the free world, and that's what has to change.
Okay. All right, a couple of things, because there's been quite a few comments. The first thing I want to say is regarding Israel's image. I would much rather that Israel is not as loved unless Israelis die. That's first of all. Okay? So people, and some of the comments here have been going on about how other people feel about Israel, how Israel will look, maybe Israel is in a really nasty neighborhood fighting against really dangerous enemies. This is the bottom line. And it's about building an existence within that neighborhood. Your question was brilliant. And it was brilliant because I lived through it. I was there through the whole Oslo process. I was there when they were talking about Arafat coming over. And the people on the right said, whoa, we don't want to bring Arafat over. And I said, oh, no, it'll be okay. It'll be okay, it'll be fine. Nothing will happen. And of course, the bombs start going off. I remember the pullout from Lebanon. Oh, that's going to be fine as well. You know, the UN, big hand on Lebanon. We will never have Hezbollah in southern Lebanon ever again. Not going to happen. I remember the talk when we pulled out of Gaza. Oh, rockets? What, from Gaza? No, not going to. The first rocket, this was Labour government, the first rocket that falls on Sderot will be in there, we'll take it all back. You cannot take back what you give away so easily. And it's a bit like the story of the UK joining the Euro. Because suddenly all the politicians that were in favour of UK joining, you can't find them anymore. The very people, and this is worth remembering, the very people pushing the two-state solution today are the people that told you it was okay to pull out of Gaza. It's the same people that said that Hezbollah would not be down in Lebanon. These are the people that are spinning the two-state solution to you today. It's not safe to listen to them, and their track record proves it.
Okay. I think we'll just move on to that question that was very interesting, which was really about, you know, if you're going to have a two-state solution and you're going to withdraw from the West Bank, then what do you do about 400,000 settlers? What does the panel think of that? Do you want to say something about it?
If I may say, first of all, the problem is we have a major problem. The situation is not sustainable. The situation, we've fought now how long? 70 years? If we keep it another 70 years, it's not good for anyone. Nonetheless, everyone is still arguing about the symptoms and the marginal issues. We're not at the core, at the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem, put yourself in the shoes of the Palestinians. There was a country that was, again, I'm not going to take more than the dedicated time, that was divided between Arabs or Muslims and Jews and non-Jews. We took 78% of it. You took 22% of it. About the only occasion we Arabs outsmarted the Jews. Nonetheless, when we had that country, we had foreign royals coming from Saudi Arabia called the Hashemites, telling us it's not our country and we have to go back to liberate Palestine. Why is someone like Mudaz Aran, an advocate of peace and a head of a secular party, the most respected and the only legitimate secular party in Jordan, sentenced to life in prison in Jordan, while the Muslim Brotherhood, Hamas, and even some ISIS affiliates are openly appearing on Jordan state television? In other words, the problem, all the roads lead to Amman. Nonetheless, does Israel do mistakes? Of course it does. Show me one country that doesn't. I'm answering this young lady here, who, by the way, I happen to be a Palestinian. Okay? Israel does mistakes. Israel did mistakes in Gaza, in the West Bank, and elsewhere. But give me Israel on the worst day versus Jordan's king on his best day. Israel in Gaza, the most populated area in the world, and I'm not in the business of advocating for Israel. I'm just stating the facts, miss. The war in Gaza, 2,200 people killed. Very populated area. It's a tragedy. But they were killed over a lengthy period of time. King Hussein, 1970, 6 days, he killed 40,000 people, including my own relatives. And let me share this story with you, because we're remembering the Holocaust. And I'm sorry, I'm breaking the time gap here, but there was a hospital called Al-Bashir Hospital in Amman. There was some Fidayeen soldiers, no more than 20 people. What the Jordanian army, under the direct command of the king's brother, Prince Hassan, who now resides in the UK, what they did, and this is documented, they chose to dig a huge hole with bulldozers and bury everyone in the hospital alive. They killed 650 people, including my own relative whose wife was pregnant, and he saw her with his own eye being set into the ditch and dumped. Why is nobody talking about this? Why is no boycott Jordan movement? Why there's no boycott Hashemite movement? Why Jordan's current king, a criminal by all means, why is he frequenting every capital in Europe while so-called Israeli criminals of war have to think twice before they board the plane? It's about time we stop the hypocrisy, and if you care for my people, please do something against the oppression we are facing in Jordan. Most Palestinians are in Jordan. Do something for the Bedouin Jordanians who can't find food. Food, I'm not talking about becoming fat. I'm talking about 3 meals a day. Bedouins in Jordan cannot find. Where is the Occupy Hashemite movement? Where's the BDS Jordan movement? None. Hypocrisy and anti-Semitism in the best disguise ever.
Okay, yeah.
Can I have a mic? I just want to thank Mudar for addressing this lady's concerns. And what I wanted to say to the audience is that we in our community organize events like this, and we talk to ourselves, and we discuss very important issues, and we try and bring out the truth as we know it to a broader society. And here we have, of Campaign for Truth, have brought you some people from outside of the community, people who have their view, who have, as this lady said, been to Palestine and witnessed, and she spoke about dead bodies and getting dead bodies back, and I'm afraid that we need to have that addressed. Mudar touched on it, but I think these people here, these very nice people who came to our meeting, have come here to hear what we have to say, but also to have themselves heard. And I know what they say because I go on the streets and I hear these people shouting at us. I hear them shouting about the dead Palestinian children, and I hear them screaming that Palestine must be free from the Jordan to the sea. I know all about it, but I do think we need to give these people some respect, and we need to answer them so that they can learn that there is another side to the NGO narrative that they are hearing when they go and visit Palestine.
Allow me to say, I have to thank that young woman for raising the question and standing for whatever she believes in. 2 opinions are always better than 1. Thank you for asking us.
Now, I'm from the Transvaal #Gauteng, and we're very simple there. You alluded to the thousands of dollars that Israel is spending on the Palestinians. I grew up in a society where I was told every single day how well off the indigenous population of South Africa was. They were better than any Africans in the rest of Africa. They were better than any blacks in Pakistan, than in India, all over the world. They had a wonderful life. But all they wanted was dignity, identity, and the franchise. How would you give that to the Palestinians?
Okay, I don't know how to give them an identity because they stole ours. Okay, so they have to find one. No, they have to. You want the answer? I'll tell it to you. I was born in South Africa. I was born in South Africa, so I'm not unfamiliar with the apartheid. And I'm not saying that Palestinians have a lovely life in the West Bank, though I drive through it and I see some pretty nice houses. It's not that whether they have a lovely life or a better life or a worse life. The issue is identity, okay? We have an identity. Boy, do we have an identity. We have an amazing identity. We have the strongest, deepest, most firmly rooted identity in the entire world today. Perhaps Zoroastrians have something a little bit further back than us, maybe. And they've almost been eradicated by Islam. But we were not eradicated. We're back. We're on our land. Now, what about the Palestinian identity? Well, first of all, they came up with it in the early 60s. There is no record of a Palestinian Arab identity prior to the early 60s. They plucked it out of thin air. And the reason they did it, I know.
But
the reason they did it, just let me finish.
I'm sorry, Brian, was there ever a Kuwait? Was there ever a Qatar? Was there ever a Saudi Arabia? Was there ever a Belgium?
Correct.
It's about human rights. People should have their own country. People should have a country, an embassy, a passport. It's not going to happen in the West Bank.
Okay.
We already have a country called Jordan. Unless you point to that, unless that happens, the entire discussion is an absolute waste of energy, and I'm sorry for spoiling your speech, Brian.
Okay. Let me just say, I actually don't like the idea of rights. Judaism does not teach us about rights. It teaches us about responsibilities, and rights flow from responsibilities. I actually think Israel made a mistake, if I'm big enough to say this, to say that we have a right of return. I think Israel should have a responsibility to Jews to home them. And I don't think they have the right to a state when they are blowing us up. When they stop doing that and they start behaving like civilized people, then they can have rights. Rights flow from their actions. They do not have an identity because they made one up to steal ours.
So they don't have an identity. Palestinians don't exist, tell me. Is that what you're trying to say?
No. You exist.
Do you think that... Sorry, can I speak? Can I speak? I just want to ask you a question to clarify. Do you think that it solves the conflict or it prolongs the conflict? Sorry, let me finish. To turn round to a group and say your identity isn't real. I just want to ask you, what do you think about that?
Listen, whether it solves or it doesn't solve is immaterial.
No, but I'm asking you the question. Do you think it's helpful or not?
I think, yes. It's an unanswerable question.
No, I'm asking you a question. Do you think it helps it or doesn't help it?
I don't care because I'm more interested in truth.
I check what you said.
Okay, but what about solutions? Please, people have wasted a lot of time on history. What about solutions?
I've got a question over there from the guy in blue.
Okay, I came today with probably less strong opinions than I sense many people in the room, but just two observations, and the second one I'd appreciate the panel's view on. The first observation is that the question is posed, is the two-state solution dead or alive? And I think as somebody said over here, I haven't heard anyone, at least on the panel, suggest that the two-state solution now is feasible. So I don't think that's really the debate. The question, it seems to me, is about whether the two-state solution is the right endpoint that we should be hoping for. Okay, so I think that's the thing. The observation I'd appreciate the panel's views on is this, that I think it's interesting that James made the point earlier on that the majority of the Israeli population, notwithstanding everything, supports a two-state solution as their preferred endpoint. It may not be that they believe it's attainable now, but it's their preferred endpoint. So I find it surprising, puzzling, that a group of people sitting in Kinloss are so unbelievably convinced that that doesn't seem to be the case. Is there maybe a little bit of sense of arrogance here, as versus I appreciate we have some people who live in Israel, but the majority of people seem to have a different view. So appreciate views on that.
Oslo was a process that was designed to bring about a two-state solution. Whether it initially started out as being sold that way to Israelis or not is irrelevant. By the mid-1990s, certainly 1997, 98, it was obvious where it was going. You can't continue to give these rights to create that without understanding where it was going to end up. Now, during the 1990s, neither side stuck to the letter of Oslo to the letter, okay? But, and in response to some of the comments that were coming over here, as Israel walked down Oslo, it lost an incredible amount of people because part of Palestinian society was not willing to make peace. So then the question becomes, well, how do you make peace when part of the society doesn't want peace? Well, part of Israeli society doesn't want peace either. But Israel is a democracy. It's held to the rule of law. Israel has an army, and it will do what it has to do to make sure that what it promises as a nation goes ahead. And we can look at the dismantlement of the settlements and the pullout from Gaza as evidence of what Israel was willing to do. And what it gets in return is rockets. So every time Israel is doing something or pushing something or giving something up, what the Palestinians choose to do, is take what they are given, turn it around, and use whatever power they then have to kill more Israelis. It's not, I'm sure that there are many people in the Palestinian areas that would prefer not to have it this way.
So why do you think a majority of Israelis still support two-state solution?
I don't. I think, no, they don't.
So we don't believe the polls.
Okay, hang on. No, it's not a question
That's fine. We can say
it's
we
not,
don't believe the polls.
listen.
Yeah.
I tell you something. In the 1990s, if you held up a mirror to Israeli society and the Israeli political spectrum, if you held up a mirror to the Israeli political spectrum and you put across it the British Zionist leadership spectrum, the British Zionist leadership would have sat roughly where Labour Zionism was. No, not now. It's merits. Yeah. If you hold up the mirror today against the British Jewish leadership, the Zionist leaderships, the groups today, and you hold it up to the Israeli spectrum, they sit opposite merits. Yeah. Okay, so there's two options. Yeah. Either you can turn around and say Israel has shifted to the right, or you can turn around and say you have shifted to the left. Right. I believe that Israel has evolved as it has come to understand the reality of the situation it is in, and in part, you guys have been left behind.
Right, okay, Melanie, you wanted to...
I think the answer to this gentleman's question, I think the answer to your question lies in a difference between what people want and what they expect. The Israeli public, to go back, Jews always accepted the two-state solution. In every time it was offered, Jews were very keen to have it because all they wanted was a state to live in peace. They didn't care about anything else. They wanted to be left alone. And so in 37, in 47, in 2000, and in 2008, if the Arabs had accepted a two-state solution, there would not have been a war. There would not have been any argument in Israel. I was in Israel in the year 2000, just before the Intifada broke out. And it was very notable that at that, it was a period of a few months, during which time I was hearing people saying, we are now thinking the unthinkable. We will give away half of Jerusalem, because for the first time we think that they will actually now let us live. And the result was the Intifada. Now, if it was the case, you asked about Hamas earlier. If the PA were to say, you know what, we made a terrible mistake, a historic mistake for 100 years, we now say the war is over, we accept there will be a Jewish state, we will live in peace alongside it. There would be overnight the state of Palestine. There would not be any opposition in Israel of any significance. The fact is, people in Israel, if you ask them, would you like a two-state solution? The answer is, well, of course we would, because all we want is to live in peace. If you ask me, do you want a two-state solution? I would say,
Of course I want a two-state solution if it means that the Arabs will let Israel live. If you ask the Israelis, do you think there will be a two-state solution? The answer now is there is no Palestinian with which we can even negotiate that possibility. That is the problem.
First of all, I think the panel, you're in danger of repeating yourself. You're going over and over the same ground now. Okay, I'll make a very quick comment to the South African gentleman, because I've lived in Africa for many years and I visited South Africa and spent quite a lot of time there. They want dignity. Many of them don't even have proper toilets to go to shit in. They go to the toilets in buckets. They don't even have pit latrines. And they have some of the highest black-on-black murders, and it's the highest rape in the whole world. People have estimated that something like 25% of all South African women have experienced rape. So where is the dignity in that? Okay, now I will ask my questions to the panel, okay? How come, for example, when we talk about occupation, we don't talk about the Indonesian army, which occupied East Timor, and they were Muslims and they slaughtered 750,000 Catholics? How come that is never mentioned? How come now, when we talk about Turkey getting Schengen, getting visa and possibly joining the European Union, how come we never talk about the genocide of the Armenians, which was the first genocide of the 20th century, which was perpetrated by the Turkish state on its Armenian Christian citizens? No, and the third one is, when we talk about, you see, you don't like what I'm saying, so you want to shut me up, right?
I don't at all. I'm just asking what your question is.
I'm asking questions. Why do we not hear about these? And why? And the last one is, let me finish. Why come when we hear about occupation, we don't hear about the occupation of Western Sahara by Morocco? I traveled in Western Sahara. Morocco doubled its territory. It just moved into Western Sahara and doubled its territory, and the world says nothing at all. So as far as I'm concerned, the world is a bunch of hypocrites and pretenders, posturers and virtue signalers, and it doesn't mean a damn thing.
Very good.
Thank you. Firstly, I came here to hear a fair debate, and I'm disappointed that the adults around me can't conduct that without interrupting in an uncivilized way. Secondly, Brian, it sounded to me that you just said that certain groups must earn their human rights. But Melanie, if your position is that there cannot be a peace until the aggressors stop aggressing, and also that the aggressors will never stop aggressing, then is that not simply allowing them to control whether or not Israel can exist in peace and stability, as well as allowing them to oppress their own people while taking a step back and saying peace is not our problem? Now, I know that these terrorists, they don't want peaceful and democratic solutions, but why should we allow them to deny that to us?
Okay.
I don't think I said that the aggressors will never stop aggressing. I said that the war won't stop until the aggression is dealt with. How can we stop the aggressors aggressing, I think is, as I was trying to say, is the responsibility of the world, that the world has contributed to the aggressors continuing to aggress, because the free world, America, Britain, the EU countries, have basically rewarded and incentivized aggression and terror. That's what has to stop. If there's one sort of lever that has to be pulled, that's not been pulled for 100 years, that's the lever. I believe if you were to stop rewarding people who are trying to destroy Israel and instead treated them as they should be treated, as pariahs, and told that, and if they were told, you will get nothing from us, you will not be treated as statesmen in waiting, you will not get funding, you will not be given the reward of a state of your own until you behave like civilized people, they would come to their senses quite quickly, because that's human nature. If you incentivize people to behave well, believe it or not, they tend to behave well. If you incentivize people to behave badly, they behave badly. So I don't think it's an insoluble problem. The problem we have is that the problem has not been identified correctly.
Well, about the general question of why the Palestinian or Arab-Israeli conflict getting all the coverage while other more horrifying and bloody, conflicts are not in the media or that much. Well, people are again ignoring the reasons of what's happening. They're ignoring. They say they were with statements like, well, the Palestinians will have to just drop their arms and everything's going to be fine after that. Or the Israelis will just have to give up East Jerusalem and everything should be fine. The statements fail to understand the complexity of the players in this conflict who have benefited out of it for a very lengthy time. Let me give you just a final statement about this. Before 1987, West Bank was under full Israeli control, even police, even civil administration. The Palestinians in the West Bank all were called Jordanian citizens, even in Jordanian media. They got all of their papers from Jordan. People were prosperous. The terrorist attacks were as low as like sometimes none per month. And this is all documented. And everything it was not broken. Why fix it? And the Palestinians, you've seen the checkpoints and the humiliating process. The Palestinians before 1987 could drive their cars from Gaza to Tel Aviv and go back on the same day, not a single checkpoint. Why has this changed? In 1987, and this is just one example, and everything I say here is documented and you can ask me for evidence. 1987, Jordan's intelligence, Jordan's King Hussein, and Iran, not Persia then, okay? And the Muslim Brotherhood of Jordan decided to create Hamas with the very purpose of launching an intifada. And up to $500 million in those days were pumped into the initiation of the intifada. In other words, as long as Arab states are powerful, rich, they don't want this conflict to end. And they're going to keep pumping money into it, and they're going to keep making it go on and on forever. Unless those responsible for it, and I could name the names, Qatar. For example, Saudi Arabia is against the conflict. Saudi Arabia is very moderate when it comes to our conflict. Nonetheless, unless we hold those to blame responsible, it's going to go on forever. Sorry.